How many people live on Earth? A little over 8 billion people, different nations, ethnicities, skin colors, and religions. Among them, about 16 million are Jewish. What's 16 million out of 8 billion? Not even 1%. So why is it that, according to Forbes, 40% of the top 10 wealthiest people on the planet are Jewish? Nearly half. And 20% of Nobel Prize winners are Jewish. Is this the Jewish phenomenon or just coincidence? Let's name just a few people, and you'll start to see why it's worth thinking about. Maya Plisitskaya, a charming, unmatched ballerina. Steven Spielberg, one of the world's most famous directors. Natalie Portman, a talented and beautiful actress who, by the way, graduated from Harvard with honors in psychology. Dustin Hoffman, a legendary actor. Albert Einstein probably doesn't even need an introduction. Paul Ehrlich, a doctor who made major contributions to treating leukemia, diphtheria, and tuberculosis. His most important invention, a treatment for syphilis. Then there's the modern American singer, songwriter, and actress, Pink, real name, Alicia Beth Moore. Sigmund Freud, psychologist, psychiatrist, neurologist, and the founder of psychoanalysis. I think it's clear there is no need to go on. There are many such people, well known across the world for their achievements and contributions. And that's when you start to think that maybe the idea that Jews are all rich and smart isn't completely baseless. Let's dig deeper. Is it actually true? Where does this belief come from? And why does it seem like Jews are so lucky in life? First, as always, we have to go back in time. So, who are the Jews? Let's turn to the encyclopedia. Jews, Hebrews, are a Semitic people who originally lived in the ancient kingdoms of Israel and Judah. Today, they live in many countries around the world. Nothing extraordinary. It seems they're just regular people. So why do they consider themselves chosen? Simple. Because that's what it says in their Bible, the part Christians call the Old Testament and Jews call the Tanakh. Here's a brief summary of the biblical timeline. After the Great Flood, Noah's descendants tried to build a tower that would reach the heavens to glorify their own power and pride. But the Creator, known as Yahweh, or just God, was watching. He didn't like people praising themselves instead of Him. So He created many languages and dialects. People who had once spoken a single language no longer understood each other. The construction stopped. Humanity spread across the world. Still, God had made a promise to Noah and his descendants not to destroy all of humanity again, no matter how sinful they became. But something had to be done about human morality, so Yahweh chose Abraham, a man known for his obedience and willingness to serve God. He promised Abraham that a great nation would come from him, a nation through which the Savior of the world would one day be born. So even before they truly existed, the Jewish people were already chosen by God thanks to Abraham. And to this day, Jews are paying the price for Abraham's trusting nature. Because trying to place yourself beside God has never ended well. So what did Yahweh demand from this ordinary mortal Abraham? Just a few things. Leave his home and wander through the desert. God tested Abraham often, sending him trial after trial. The harshest test, sacrificing his only long-awaited son. What would you do in Abraham's place? He believed in God's promise so completely that he tied up his son and raised the knife over him without hesitation. At the last moment, an angel stopped him, and a ram was sacrificed instead. Why did God need this? To prove that Abraham's faith had reached perfection. Before his son was even born, Abraham had to flee to Egypt during a famine. There his descendants began to multiply, and the Jewish people were born. Let's fast forward a few centuries to the story of the Sinai covenant. The Jews, led by Moses, escaped Egypt and arrived at Mount Sinai to meet God. God agreed to make them His chosen people, if they followed His commandments. Some say Yahweh offered this covenant to many nations, but only the Jews agreed first. So did God immediately bless them with superiority? Not at all. According to historical records, the Jewish people weren't especially grand or culturally advanced compared to other nations. In fact, they often lagged behind in development, lifestyle, and even morality, especially compared to pagan nations like Egypt. If not for the divine promise made to Abraham, they could have been wiped out for their sins. So the main reason they're considered the chosen people is because of God's word to Abraham, since Jews are his descendants. What else made this nation stand out? Only God himself knows. Or maybe the reason lies in the history of this people. Maybe, as his favorites, God sent them endless hardships to teach them how to survive and gain life experience. Let's open the Chronicles and find out. The history of the Jewish people is not only a chronicle of a millennia-old culture, religion, and traditions, but also a testament to incredible strength of spirit in the face of relentless persecution and injustice. And the Jews have always faced persecution and rejection. Whenever they tried to settle in a land and start a business, haters would immediately show up and push them out. So why did they wander the world? Where is their homeland, their country? To answer these questions, first ask yourself, where does God dwell on earth? The answer is simple. It's in the temples built by the faithful, whether it's a church, pagoda, mosque, or cathedral. The Jews had such a place too, the Jerusalem Temple, the most visited pilgrimage site. The first temple was destroyed almost 500 years before Christ by Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, who first conquered Egypt, then the weak kingdom of Judah. He captured Jerusalem and took the surviving Jews into slavery. Only a handful of poor farmers were left in Judah. There is a biblical explanation for this event. God was angry at the Jewish people for their corruption and dishonor, and took away their homeland. The kingdom of Judah disappeared, and the Jewish people were held captive for nearly 70 years. But back then, conquering wars were common, and the Persians took Babylon. The Persian king, Cyrus the Great, allowed the Jews to return to Judah and rebuild their temple. You could say the Jewish people regained their homeland, but for how long? And who ultimately destroyed the sacred site of the Jewish people? Let's consider one version of events. The Jews lived peacefully in Judah until the 70s AD, when the Roman Empire started conquering the world, and soon Judah became a Roman province. Roman emperors didn't interfere with the Jews' belief in their God, Yahweh. They only demanded taxes and loyalty to the emperor's cult. Most Roman provinces did the same, paid taxes quietly, and placed the emperor's statue alongside their gods. Problem solved, everyone could rest easy. But the Jewish people rebelled. They didn't want to pay heavy taxes or worship the emperor. Religious zealots fled to forests and mountains to form armed groups fighting their oppressors. They called themselves zealots, ready to die for their faith and destroy anyone who opposed them, even if that person was a fellow Jew. When a Roman governor tried to seize part of the treasures from the Jewish temple as punishment for disobedience, the zealots fought back with arms. They not only drove out the governor but also freed their state by defeating the Roman troops. Freedom! Live and rejoice, people of Judah. But not so fast. Internal conflicts began to flare up among the Jews. They fought each other. Zealots hunted down those among their own who doubted the faith, or worse, abandoned it. Thousands of these unfortunate people were killed. The Romans seized the opportunity and surrounded Jerusalem. Taking the city by force wasn't easy. It was protected by strong walls and tall towers. But almost 1 million people inside the walls made it impossible to supply the city with food. What was worse, inside the besieged city, the Zealots continued fighting for control. They ruthlessly robbed peaceful residents and watched closely to make sure no one opened the gates for the Romans or tried to escape. When the Romans finally broke into the city, they were horrified by what the religious fanatics had done. Truly, obsession with faith had blinded reason, or maybe Yahweh was testing his people's devotion once again. By that time, a fire had started in the temple, but no one was there to save the sanctuary. The Zealots were busy fighting the Romans. And when it became clear the city had fallen, One fleeing zealot threw a burning torch into the Jerusalem temple, probably out of spite. If we can't have it, no one can. So what happened? Did the Jewish fanatics burn their own temple? Did they drag their people into bloody wars and strip them of their homeland? Here's some food for thought. Though many sources claim the temple was destroyed by the Romans, the fact remains: the sanctuary was ruined. Only a small part survived. By the way, that part still exists today in Jerusalem. It's called the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall, a place where pilgrims from all over the world come, where important state ceremonies and religious services are held, and where the victims of the Holocaust are commemorated. We'll talk about the Holocaust a little later. For now, Jerusalem was destroyed. The grief and sorrow of the Jewish people are hard to put into words, but they lost their homeland and were forced to scatter across the world. Hopefully now it's clearer why members of this people can be found in every corner of the globe. The diaspora began, the 1,000-year existence of the Jewish people outside their historical homeland. And how are people without a country treated? Naturally, with hostility, suspicion, and restrictions. The Jews were always blamed for everything. To survive, they had to work hard. Diligence was instilled from childhood. The ability to earn well, despite tough working conditions, sparked envy and resentment. Sometimes local officials borrowed money from Jews, then invented charges against them to avoid repayment, declaring them outlaws and forcing them to leave town or even the country, sometimes with only a day's notice to pack up women, elders, and children. And you can't argue you're a stranger in someone else's house. In the 13th century, Jews became outcasts in most Christian societies across Europe. They were accused of disbelief, forbidden to own land, and often restricted in their professions and rights. They frequently became convenient scapegoats to blame for disasters, plagues, poor harvests, economic crises. During the time of the Black Death, the plague, rumors spread that Jews were poisoning wells, which sparked waves of pogroms throughout Europe. But even this did not break the Jewish people. Guess who was the first in Italy to develop glassmaking and paper production? Yes, the Jews. But as soon as the authorities found out, the production was banned, and the Jews were forcibly relocated to isolated areas called ghettos, surrounded by walls. These districts were cramped, poor, and ruled by strict regulations. This was meant to make the social rejection of the Jewish population by the rest of society even more visible. But even after creating the ghettos, the authorities were not satisfied. They thought it would be better to expel the Jews from the country entirely, or even better, from Europe altogether. However, the Jewish people possessed valuable medical knowledge, and the city treasuries often benefited from their contributions. What was to be done? How to handle this awkward situation? Finally, a solution was found. The Italian government moved all Jews living in the country to the island of Cannaregio, where a district called Ghetto Nuovo, New Foundry Yard, was built. Jews were forbidden to own houses or land, and were banned from painting or other forms of art. They were like animals in cages. Leaving the ghetto without a valid reason was allowed only in exceptional cases. Even then, Jews had to wear special head coverings marked with yellow badges so they could be easily identified. By the way, Russia was no better than Europe in its disrespectful attitude towards Jews. At the end of the 18th century, the Russian Empire introduced the so-called Pale of Settlement, a boundary beyond which Jews were not allowed to live, especially in Moscow, St. Petersburg, and other major cities. Jews were massively restricted in their rights. They could not hold government positions, were barred from some universities, and often faced discrimination in business. Even university admissions were controlled by quotas, called the 5% rule, meaning no more than 5% of students could be Jewish. At the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century, waves of anti-Semitic pogroms swept through Russia. Mobs beat and killed Jews, looted their homes and shops, often with the authorities turning a blind eye and sometimes even supporting the violence. Especially terrible were the blood libels, false accusations that Jews were ritually murdering Christian children. These myths often triggered brutal reprisals. Jews were openly hated and treated as second-class citizens. All of this was yet another proof of how dangerous religious and ethnic hatred fueled by ignorance can be. The ultimate horror was the Holocaust, the darkest chapter in Jewish history, when Germany set out to wipe an entire people off the face of the earth. The word Holocaust comes from Greek and means completely burned. Jews call it Hashoah, meaning catastrophe. The term Holocaust appeared after World War II and refers to the genocide of the Jewish race by the Nazis, led by Adolf Hitler, from 1933 to 1945. Why did Hitler hate the Jews so much? First, Hitler was a Nazi, and in his view, there was only one pure race, the Aryan race, without any mixing. People from any other group, especially Jews, did not fit into his ideal German society. They are different, so they must not exist. Why were Jews singled out in particular? Germans blamed them for losing World War I. Of course, this was convenient scapegoating, since many Jews fought on the German side in the war, including officers and even division commanders. Some held important government posts. The Nazi Party deliberately stoked hatred toward Jews, using them as a convenient target to manipulate public dissatisfaction and consolidate power. But there was a third reason, probably the strongest. Hitler believed that he was not the only one dreaming of world domination. His greatest enemy was the Jews. They, without a homeland and scattered worldwide, had created secret societies and were plotting to take over the world. The Nazi leader was so obsessed with this idea, and so convincing in his speeches, that many people, in Germany and beyond, believed him. Anti-Semitism increased dramatically. The first anti-Jewish pogroms in 1933 were not planned, but German Jews were already being stripped of their civil rights. Some fled the country, leaving everything behind, history repeating itself even centuries later. Those who refused to leave doomed themselves. Here is an important clarification. At first, Hitler had no plan to completely exterminate the Jews. Don't believe it? He needed cheap labor and obedient, intelligent slaves, and many Jews were talented and skilled. What did Hitler plan to do with conquered peoples? Set up ghettos far from Germany, somewhere in Poland or Madagascar. After conquering Russia, forced Jews, along with other peoples, to Siberia. But when the anti-Hitler coalition formed, aiming to overthrow his regime and liberate the countries occupied by Nazi Germany, the decision to completely annihilate the Jewish people was made. From then on, the Nazis began systematically exterminating the Jews. Who gave the order? Why wasn't it found in any fascist archives? Because there was no loud order or clear plan with a red seal. The Nazis simply unleashed a killing machine, run not by ordinary soldiers, but by sadists in white coats, scientists with advanced degrees from Germany's top universities. Do you think these inhumane people didn't understand what they were doing? The terrible crimes they committed? At first, the Nazis used the traditional method of killing, shootings. But soon, Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, came to a horrifying conclusion. Bullets cost money, and there were still too many Jews. That's when they invented a more efficient, no-waste way to exterminate the 6 death camps on occupied Polish territory. These camps were equipped with gas chambers that could hold up to 2,000 people at once and crematorium ovens that operated around the clock. A grim fact. While Jews were being killed, their belongings, especially gold jewelry and precious stones, were sent to Germany. They didn't even spare gold dental crowns. Some of that melted gold later ended up in Swiss banks, in accounts held by high-ranking Nazi officials. After World War II, it became known that the Holocaust claimed the lives of almost 87% of the Jewish population in Europe. It seemed that after all the suffering Abraham's descendants endured, they would resign themselves to their fate and gradually disappear from the face of the earth, fading into history. But not at all. First, the Jewish people worked to restore their homeland. By the 1920s, many Jewish immigrants had already settled in Palestine and formed communities. After World War II in 1948, an independent Jewish state, Israel, appeared on the world map for the first time in 2,000 years. And on May 11, 1949, Israel became a member of the United Nations. Having endured suffering, trials, and humiliation, the Jewish people forged an unbreakable spirit within themselves. This inner strength became their invisible shield, strong as bronze and deep as the roots of a centuries-old tree. For thousands of years, they have fought hard for their right to exist in a world that repeatedly tried to destroy them. Now, maybe we're starting to understand why Jews often succeed in many industries, stand out for their intelligence, and earn well. Though there are a few fields where you rarely find Jews, what are they? Be patient. You'll find out soon. So, what rules have members of this people developed for themselves, not only to survive in secular society, but to thrive? First of all, when faced with obstacles, Jews never give up or retreat. If you're forced to leave one place, don't be discouraged. Find another, maybe even more profitable. If something stops you from doing a certain job, start a different one. Better yet, start something nobody has done before. And don't just open a new business. Do everything you can to succeed and achieve excellent results. Also, Jews are a very close-knit people. History has taught them to stick together, survive, and help each other in any endeavor, especially in business. Do you believe that our thoughts are powerful? Not just floating around in our heads, but able to bring real results? Supporters of this idea say that if certain thoughts take root in a person's mind, they soon become part of their existence, either coming to life or guiding the way. Believe it or not, that's up to you. But when you really want something and start moving in that direction, it feels like someone is helping you. Maybe some higher power. Jews believe they are always helped by their God. They never despair or give up, even if things don't work out. Instead, they start thinking about where and how to earn money. Is that a bad thing? To be able to find your place anywhere? No other people could match the tolerance, unity, and hard work of the Jewish people. By the way, have you noticed that Jews never boast about their wealth or openly show it off? Legends and jokes about Jewish stinginess abound, but maybe it's not stinginess at all. It's strict saving and not wanting to part with hard-earned money. Have you ever considered that explanation for Jewish frugality? And what about their attitude toward failure? Think about how you see problems. Jews have a book called the Talmud. It's over 600 years old and contains all the rules for Jewish life. How to come to faith, how to pray, how to treat children and parents, how to avoid poverty, and much more. Talmud in Hebrew means teaching. In this book, there's a character whose name means man of all good things. No matter how stuck a situation was, he never lost his spirit and always said it was all for the best. Imagine the powerful positive energy a person gets when they don't fall into despair, but instead believe there's no negative outcome, only experience gained. I can even share an example from my own life, or rather, from my best friends. This happened long ago, right after school. My friend dreamed of becoming an architect since childhood, but she always struggled with math and drafting. Naturally, she failed the math exam badly. There were many tears and hardships. She decided to take a year off and try again. Not wanting to waste time, she spent a year studying medicine, where the math wasn't as difficult. And guess what? After that year, she couldn't imagine herself without a doctor's white coat. Today, my friend is the best general practitioner in the region and has saved many lives. It's scary to think what might have happened if she had passed that math exam on her first try. How many similar examples do you have from your own life? Moments when, after accepting the situation and wiping your tears, you told yourself it was for the best, and years later, looking back, You realize that if you hadn't changed course then, you wouldn't have achieved what you have now. So it turns out the Jews are right. Just by changing how you look at things, even the hardest moments gain meaning, because it's through those moments that we learn, grow stronger, and keep moving forward. Everyone faces challenges in life. It's how we respond to them that really matters. Living with constant uncertainty and fear about the future has shaped a unique attitude in Jews toward people, especially when it comes to doing business. Have you ever done business with a Jewish person? Did anything stand out? Like, do they do things differently? Exactly. They have an amazing way of greeting people. And it's not just polite. They do it warmly, skillfully, and sincerely, giving compliments that make you instantly feel genuinely welcome. And it's hard not to feel good. You get a real boost of kindness and positivity. In fact, the ability to negotiate is a hallmark of Jews. It's not just talking, it's an art, a science taught from birth. Most conflicts or misunderstandings happen because people just can't find a compromise, and the problem stays unsolved. They talk, realize the other person isn't interested in working together or growing a business, and just move on. Don't want to? Fine. We'll find someone else. But Jews never do that. From thousands of years of experience, they learned that if they can't reach an agreement, they won't get anywhere, especially professionally. So they try every possible way to make peace. Every Jewish entrepreneur firmly believes that you can find common ground with anyone. It's not just a strategy, it's a philosophy of communication. Now, let's try to answer the question, why are Jews so smart? Again, let's look back. A long history of exile and struggle for survival made knowledge the greatest treasure for the Jewish people. Education became not just a way to succeed, but a true symbol of dignity and strength. That's why intellect, erudition, and a drive for constant improvement remain highly valued in Jewish culture. There's an unspoken rule deeply rooted in Jewish culture. Every free minute should be used for learning. It's not just a good habit, it's an internal law passed down through generations. To learn is to live. That's why Jews, no matter the field, science, business, medicine, or art, always strive not just to be good, but to be the best. And it's almost subconscious, instinctive. So are Jews always at the top everywhere? Not so fast. Remember, we said there are fields where you hardly ever see Jews? Jews don't like professional sports and rarely participate. Why? Maybe because competition itself conflicts with their spiritual principles, or because their upbringing focuses more on developing the mind than physical strength. So among great athletes, you'll find very few Jews. Also, Jews don't tend to go into farming. Finding a notable Jewish agronomist is like finding a dry stone in the ocean. That's understandable. How many centuries were they forbidden to farm? So, what's the bottom line? Are Jews really the smartest and richest? At least they believe so. And some even use that belief to their advantage. But the answer isn't in myths or luck. It's in centuries-old tradition forged through suffering. Their intelligence is not just natural talent, but a deeply rooted culture of learning, self-improvement, and respect for knowledge. From childhood, they're taught, study, think, analyze, even when everything seems against you. And wealth? It's not just money. It's about knowing how to build, negotiate, see opportunities, take calculated risks, and learn even from others' mistakes. Jews don't see success as luck. It's all about hard work, patience, and constant growth. Their strength is in their minds. Their foundation is tradition, pride in their heritage, and their wealth is the ability to make knowledge their most valuable asset. And still, sometimes it seems like Yahweh is helping them even today. Believe it if you want, don't if you don't. But the idea of being superior sure warms the soul sometimes, especially when everything around seems so bad.